Good evening. Thank you very much, Sally. I'm indeed honored to be invited to this Wallace Stegnar series of lecture, and thank you all for that. I have been learning more about you and your organization and the wonderful effort you've made of protecting land, 23 acres apparently short of the 75,000, which is amazing. And so in a way, tonight, I'll try to build on that for you and talk about the management of land, because you're doing the wonderful first step of protecting it from getting broken up, divided, etc. But ultimately, it has to be managed. So we will, in fact, be talking about management. Now, the talk tonight that I'm going to give you is indeed a serious talk. I will talk about some shocking statistics, figures, but it's not a doomsday talk. In fact, it's one of great hope. All that you hold dear, and you really do, and you show it by your commitment, your donations, your organization, is ultimately dependent on orderly civilization. If you end in the sort of chaos we do in some parts of Africa, etc., it all disintegrates. So being dependent on orderly civilization, let me just get rid of that. This really means city-based, because civilization is city-based by definition. Now, there are many threats today to not just your cities, the things you do in the cities, but to the cities themselves. And this is not new. We have had more than 20 civilizations fail in the world, and now we're facing the same threat globally. So those threats come in many names, many angles, but you can bunch them together, if you like, and express them as climate change, because ultimately that's the gravest danger that they're combining towards. Now, when I first became very, very seriously committed and concerned about studying this problem was almost exactly now 60 years ago when I left university. Now, at that time, we didn't have any of today's buzzwords: biodiversity loss, desertification, climate change. I just saw these as one issue. Without biodiversity loss, desertification doesn't occur. It is only a symptom. It's not even a problem, really. And without addressing desertification, we are not going to be able to deal with climate change, realistically. So they really are one issue, but you couldn't even have a conference discussing them as one issue, because our education, our organizations, everything are so siloed and compartmentalized. Now, thinking of this problem of climate change, I got a shock shortly before our London conference last year when I read a report from an eminent group of scientists, philosophers, mathematicians in Oxford, and they put out a report on the 5 greatest dangers to humans' survival, and one of them wasn't climate change. And they explained why. Because according to their assessment, some parts of our planet will still be habitable. That means most of our cities are going to be gone, entire cities. Okay, so that's what I want to talk about, but I don't want this to be a doomsday talk. I'll offer you much more hope than that eminent group of scientists. Now, desertification, all right, not climate change, desertification, the symptoms of that are increasing frequency and severity of droughts, just as you're experiencing in California. They are poverty, social breakdown, rising violence with that, pastoral genocide in many countries, and as some people have called it, pastoral suicide in this country, because ranchers should know better, but the Western ranching culture is dying out. It provides ideal recruitment for organizations like Al-Qaeda, etc., with the massive movement of people across borders, the boatloads of people drowning in the Mediterranean trying to reach Europe. All of these things, and the violence associated with it, and climate change, are symptoms of desertification. Now, if you don't believe, as some might not believe, that climate change is real, all right, I can tell you one thing, desertification is real. So we'll talk about that because that's what's leading to climate change. So even if you don't believe in the fossil fuel cause of climate change, we'll still talk about desertification. Now let me start with agriculture, because this is the basis of civilization. When you think about agriculture, without agriculture, we could not have a Wallace Stegnar series of lectures. We couldn't have a university. We couldn't have an army. You can't have a church. You can't have a school, university, city. Agriculture is the basis of all of civilization. Now, commonly, we are led to believe that agriculture is crop production. And if you watch people's language, they talk about it as though it was crop production. No, agriculture is the production of food and fiber from all of the world's lands and waters. So fisheries, forestries, wildlife, livestock, all of these are agriculture, okay, on which everything is dependent. Now, how are we doing with agriculture? Let's have a look at that. Something's gone wrong there. Sorry about that, it's got completely distorted. Oh, I see the woman is right over on the right. It's me, I think, the angle I'm looking at. All right, we need about 1/2 ton of food per human per year for a good, healthy human. But what are we producing? We're producing about 10 tons of eroding soil every year per human alive today, over 75 billion tons. Now, those estimates are extremely conservative because they're from the croplands, mostly. Very little recognition of the rangelands. Now, when we look at these horrific figures that those are, all right, and look at that picture, that's on rangeland in the United States, showing you the amount of soil loss there just in New Mexico, which is not that far from you guys. Now, a dime thickness of soil loss is, I'm told, roughly 20 tons per acre. How many tons have been lost from that rangeland? This is just horrific what is going on in the country. Now, we know that livestock cause this. This is an ancient belief. You can go back thousands of years in ancient texts and see the nomads being blamed for causing the deserts. Every university, every government, every environmental organization, humanity. This is our belief that that is what's causing desertification. All right, so now I'm going to jump straight to climate change and what is causing it. Now, these are essentially the gases: carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, methane, black carbon, which is not a gas but is particulate matter, black carbon matter now, and desertification. Now, the rough proportions coming from fossil fuels or from agriculture, we don't know what they are. The figures are so erratic, no matter what you read, and varied, but for practical illustrative purposes, we see that about half is coming from fossil fuels and about half from agriculture, soil destruction, etc. Right, so that's the situation we face. These are the things causing climate change. Now, if we look at that situation and recognize that humans are a tool-using animal, I can say to all of you in the room tonight, go and have a drink of water, but don't use technology. How would you do it? You'd have to go to the nearest river and drink with your hand in your mouth. You cannot even drink water without technology. Everything we do, we're a tool-using animal. Now, we imagine that we've got thousands of tools, so we have, but nearly all of them are technology. They're artifacts of the human mind, from the first sticks and stones to chemicals, machines, everything that we have today. And then we have fire as a tool, and then those two tools, technology and fire, we've had for about 1 million years. The technology couldn't affect our environment until we got fire. Then we could melt stones, go into the bronze, the copper age, bronze age, iron age, and then develop the technology of today. Every single thing in this room, including the clothing you made, you're wearing was made possible because of fire. There's nothing in this room that could have been made before fire. The tools to make the furniture, your clothing, everything. All right, so we've had two tools for 1 million years, humans, technology and fire, and then we got the idea of conservation, resting the environment to let it recover, and we got that idea about 10,000 years ago, sometime in the last 10,000 years. All right, so if we have those tools alone, and mostly it involves technology, which of these things can we prevent? Just that. We can use technology to develop alternative fuels to fossil fuels, alternative sources of energy. So that is possible with technology, and we're going to have to do it. So if we stop all fossil fuel use, climate change will continue. So agriculture is our greatest danger, not fossil fuels. And everybody focuses on fossil fuels as the greater danger. Now, if we look at this situation and what can we prevent adding, okay. Do you see if we add livestock as a tool? All of them are now capable of solution because it's a biological problem. It has to be solved biologically. All right, so looking at that now, where can we store the excess of these gases? We've got to put them somewhere and bring them out of the atmosphere. Where can we put them? We've got the possibility of the oceans, but they're acidifying already because of excess carbon, apparently. So where are we going to put them? And you know, everybody's telling you where to put them, in planting trees. No. Trees are essential. They'll buy us some short-term time. They're part of the ambient cycle of carbon that is essential for all life. All of us in this room are mostly carbon. And so they're essential, but when the tree dies, that carbon is released again. So where can we store it long term? And frankly, we're left with soil. And thank goodness people are beginning to talk about that now and to recognize that the soils of the world that we're destroying at this alarming rate are where this needs to go. All right, now let's look at what can we remove and store safely using only technology, as all of us are wanting to do today who vilify livestock. That's what we're left with. What can we store safely in the soils? The answer is, this is, nothing without risk. Because if we use a technological solution, whatever it is, it's going to be like playing Russian roulette with all 6 chambers loaded. We have never yet, to my knowledge, solved a complex natural biological problem with technology. That is playing Russian roulette. So there'll be enormous risk if we rely on geoengineering or storing any use of technology. Now, if we look at the possibilities with livestock, what could we stop, etc.? Now it becomes all of them. Not going to be easy, but at least it's now possible. Whereas without the livestock, it's not even possible. So this is what we need to give ourselves hope, that there is now a possibility. All right, so we've going to have to deal with desertification. Now, if you want to know what causes desertification, it is not livestock, as I'm going to show you. What it is our management practices, as is occurring over most of California, that lead to the available rainfall being less effective. Now, effective rainfall is a term I had to coin about 50 years ago when I first began to realize the vast difference between the rain we were getting and what was causing the floods and the droughts. We were getting droughts in high rainfall years, and we were getting floods in low rainfall years. That just didn't make sense. And so effective rainfall is the rain that falls, penetrates the soil, and it only leaves the soil through the soil, flowing through the soil to rivers, etc., aquifers, or it leaves through growing plants. It doesn't leave the soil any other way. Non-effective rainfall, as you have over much of California, is rain that falls and leaves across the surface, giving you flash flooding, etc. And what doesn't leave across the surface leaves out of the surface through evaporation between plants, bare surfaces. Now, the difference can be enormous, as I'll show you. So here, in the Tihama Desert, we have rain falling, and this was 25 millimeters of rain falling right near a research station. This is in Yemen, North Yemen, all right? And you can see the water running and so on. It was a good storm. Now, just so that you know, 25 millimeters of rain, or an inch, is 3 drums of water per square meter. So that's a tremendous lot of water. That means that we got 1,250 drums per hectare of water. So 2.5 times that. Well, sorry, the other way around for acres. That's what we got. So that's a tremendous lot of water. Now, the next day, the soil looked like that. And the break here in the front is because I had to use the keys of the car to even break the surface. It was so solid. Now, that is non-effective rainfall. Maybe 1 millimeter was effective. The rest of that's gone, evaporation and runoff. All right, so to understand effective rainfall, what we've got to have is not runoff across the surface and what soaks in, then evaporating out, which is just what you've seen. What we've got to have is a covered soil, fully covered as possible, so that the rain that comes in soaks in and flows through the soil, and the only other way it leaves is through plants. And the difference is profound. If we make 1 inch of rain more effective in New Mexico, every single year it means more than 3 dams full the size of Elephant Butte Dam, which when it was built was the biggest dam in the United States. It means that every year and cumulative in the soil. So you can see why California is getting increasing floods and droughts, not due to climate change. It's this that is causing us all over the western United States. All right, so where is this occurring? It isn't occurring in the very humid environments that are humid throughout the year. So it's occurring to a lesser extent where it's not humid all the year, but it's almost there, like a lot of the California coast, etc. It's not going to turn into desert, but the same degradation is happening. We just use this unfortunate term desertification because the end result is desert in the lower rainfall areas and so on. So these are the areas where it's not occurring, although the land degradation can. So where is it occurring? It's about 2/3 of the world where the rainfall is very seasonal and you get periods of humidity and then long periods of dryness and not a lot of mist or anything else providing moisture in that period. So it's about 2/3 of the world and much of the United States. So these are the climates where it's occurring, where there's this period of humidity and then dryness. Now, what is leading to this? Let's look at it here. This is on a ranch I live on in Africa. I've known it for years. I used to own it and then I donated it for the good of the people and the wildlife and so on, but I still live on it. Now, we've just come through 4 months of rain. Now we're going to go into 8 months of no rain. Right? So if you watch that piece of land, you see what's happening now. It's all drying. Now, all that grass is now dead above ground. And so these very seasonal areas like that, we call them grasslands, even though some may be dry deciduous forests, etc., because the grass plants provide the main soil stability and soil cover. So now this mass of vegetation has died. Now, it's got to get out of the way by the end of the 8 months, because if it doesn't, it's going to oxidize and it's going to kill the grass. So this is what happens if it doesn't get out of the way. It now turns from biological decay, which is rapid, to chemical breakdown and physical weathering, which is very, very slow. And I've got pictures, before the digital, so I didn't use them, they're too poor quality, of dead perennial grasses in California that died about 50 years ago and still haven't broken down. Okay, so you have this sort of climate in parts of California. All right, so we've got these three tools, and we've got this problem that we've got billions of hectares of the world, vast areas, most of the United States, where we've got to prevent this oxidation occurring and do it every year, right? So let's look at our tools. What technology can replace biological decay over 2/3 of the world's land every single year? I think we can go into science fiction and you can't even imagine it. Forget it. Technology is not going to do it. Now, we've tried. The Israelis are trying very hard. They're spending enormous amount of money, 10,000 euros per hectare, planting, harvesting water, channeling the water, planting trees, etc. No hope. That's using technology. Just like drinking the water, I'm using technology. So they're using technology to plant plants. That's not going to replace biological decay, and it's not working. The Nabateans were doing that 2,000 years ago there, and we haven't learned. We're still doing the same thing. Now, in the United Arab Emirates, they've tried very, very hard, had a lot of expert advice in, they've got a lot of money. They've spent over $30 billion on 1% of their land, planting trees, drip irrigating with lines, desalinating salt water, etc. Well, you can see the deserts are just blowing through it. We will never solve that problem with technology. That's a given. Nobody has shown me how to do it in 50 years of challenging that. Now, what about fire? That's our next tool. Well, fire is rapid oxidation, and it pollutes the environment terribly badly, and it leaves the soil bare, so it makes the rainfall less effective. And no matter what type of fire you use, early, late, cool, fire exposes soil, pollutes the environment, makes the rainfall less effective. So fire isn't going to do it. Now, here is a grassland maintained by fire. You see, it does keep the plants alive. Now, most people in this country would be thrilled with that grassland. It is so dense. Range scientists would classify that as extremely good. Well, is it? That is maintained by fire. So if we look between the plants at the soil, which is what matters, we find the soil is very hard capped, covered with algae, crusted, and from that grassland, we're getting these floods. And that is Kruger National Park, being flooded out from grasslands outside the park. So fire isn't going to solve this problem. It never will. We have tried to use fire for over 10,000 years. In some places longer, Australia, 50,000 years. And it hasn't worked. So what do we do next? Rest. Well, here's a national park, a wilderness area in America. That's been rested for 70, 80 years. It's had hundreds of thousands of dollars spent on soil conservation measures. What do you think about the biodiversity loss there? Now, hundreds of people visit this, but they don't see it because we believe in wilderness. We believe in leaving it to nature. We follow our beliefs, and we can't see because humans see what we believe. Now, in that, we have wilderness, and we've got signs like this. You're confined to paths. You don't step off that path because you're going to, with one footprint, do 1,000 years of damage to the crusted soil. And we just can't see. We desperately need to break that crusted soil to make the rainfall effective. Again, that used to be an irrigation-based civilization. And how can we blame livestock? Because they failed because of non-effective rainfall before the Spaniards arrived. There were no livestock in America until the Spaniards. So that whole civilization had failed in America because of desertification before livestock. Here's an experimental plot. There are many of these in the western United States, and showing the grassland that was green when that picture was taken. I just have the black and white picture. and then there you see it desertifying badly. Now, that picture was in the TED talk. I took that from the position paper on climate change by the International Range Society, and there is no explanation for this in science other than they called it unknown processes. Those unknown processes are known, they're rest. The main cause of desertification is over-resting the land. Totally counterintuitive. The exact opposite of what humans have believed for thousands of years and the beliefs of science. All right, so here is a beautiful wilderness area. It's in memory of Aldo Leopold. This is 1/4 of a mile from my home. So I take people down there anytime I want to. Hundreds of people visit that, and they all think it's beautiful because it's commemorating Aldo Leopold. And it's in a terrible state. That's as bad as almost anything we've got in Africa. So how much of a land ethic is that? So I say to you, what you're doing is wonderful, protecting land, but at the end of the day, you're going to have to manage it. And is it going to be ethical, or isn't it? All right, so coming back to our problem of desertification, we can forget technology, we can forget fire, and any of you, just stop me if you think I'm wrong, we can forget about resting the land in those environments. Now, in the humid environments, resting the land, conservation, is the most powerful tool we have to restore biodiversity. And if you want confirmation, look at where the civilizations failed in those environments, and we find them under the jungle, under the recovered vegetation. Okay? Because everything recovered, no matter how badly damaged, but not in the 2/3 of the world that's very seasonal. And then no amount of planting trees and grass replaces biological decay. So what are we going to do? Now you see why in the TED talk I said we only have one option. We've got to start looking at something else, and that is, of course, livestock. So if we're to deal with the boatloads of drowning people, Beijing, some days they're getting 250,000 tons of sand dumped on the city in one day. Nature will win. No city can survive that, going on and getting worse and worse. So how are we going to deal with all this? We're only going to deal with it by thinking differently. Now, these environments that I'm talking of are the environments from which the large animals came. Millions and billions of them in numbers we cannot even begin to imagine today. You have 10 large mammal species untold in North America. There used to be 40 more species of large mammals in America before humans got here. All right? So these are the environments from which these animals came, and they only had one defense from their predators, which were pack-hunting predators in the grasslands of the world, the seasonal environments. And they were ferocious predators, and the only defense these animals had from them was to bunch and crowd, and when they bunched and crowded, they dunged and urinated all over their own food, so they had to keep moving. Not necessarily migration, but just constant movement of dung and urine and fouled ground, because no species will feed on the, or likes to feed on ground they have fouled. To us, human fouling is terribly offensive. So is pig, so is baboon, because it's an omnivore, too close to us. But we don't mind putting cow shit on our floors and in our gardens and everything, because it's not close to us. You see what happens there. All right, so then we are left with only one option. That is our livestock. Now, when I first realized this, way back in about the mid-60s, by then I'd realized, okay, we cannot save the land with wildlife. I'd started the game ranching industry, which is now a multi-billion-dollar industry, and I had initiated that, coined the words game ranching, believing if we could get rid of the livestock, we could do things right. And then I found I was wrong. We had to have the livestock. And when I realized that, the question was how to do it. So we'll come to that in a moment. But let's look at first, will using the livestock work? Now, there we had that grassland we were looking at. Now what we've done here is a simulation of the wild herds of the past, and we've crowded cattle, there's some sheep and goats but you can't see them, onto that very high level for a short period, and you can see the change. Now that massive material has been broken down, dung, urine and litter on the surface, so it's all broken down. Now light can reach the growth points of the grass when it starts to grow again. The soil is completely covered, so any rain is fully effective. Now when that started to flush, you can see it, it's free to flush, and there's the same site now, a year later. All right, so we know now that, okay, if we can use animals, we can do it. It's a biological problem, and they can do what is needed. So that brings us to how do we do that? Livestock need to be properly managed somehow. And that dilemma is what I faced in the mid-60s. It dawned on me, okay, we've got nothing but livestock now. We'd had 10,000 years of people doing mob grazing, bunching the cattle, group grazing, whatever you like to call it, herding their animals, very knowledgeable people, fully aware of and in tune with their environment. They domesticated these things, and it had created the great deserts of the world by overresting the land while they were overgrazing plants without knowing about it. Okay, so we couldn't do that. Then we'd had 100 years roughly of modern range science, fencing, rotational grazing, etc. And that had accelerated desertification, as we first discovered in Africa and then confirmed in America. And Voisin had studied that in Europe, where they'd had 200 years roughly of rotational grazing, and he'd found it was failing there. It wasn't leading to desert because of the more humid environment, and so he had developed rational grazing, all right, which was a planning process. So I began to work with that, worked with his planning process, replacing all rotations and grazing systems. I came horribly unstuck, and then I realized it's not because he's wrong. The man is right. But it's more complex in Africa, in these climates, than it is in France. So I've just got to find a better way. And that led to looking at all professions to see who has dealt with anything nearly as complicated as this. No biologists had, no ecologists had, no range scientists had, anything of that sort. And fairly logically, I looked at businesses, and it was too academic, and so on. They'd never dealt with anything quite as quick changing and chaotic. And then logically, I looked at the military, and how had the military over 300 years in Europe worked out how to train people quickly to deal with immediate battlefield conditions and always come up with the best possible plan in an ever-changing scene. So as an infantry officer in the army, I was trained in that stuff. It was easy enough to just take 300 years of military stuff and say, okay, I see what they do. We can do that on ranches, but we got another problem, and that battles are always short, maybe a week, maybe a day, maybe an hour. But ranches have got to plan a year, 2 years, whatever. They've got to plan for big areas, different dimensions. How could you do that? Oh, easy. Put it on a chart. We just put it on a chart. And it's pathetically simple. And I've had school leavers learn to do this in an hour and a half and do a beautiful job. All right, so we did that, and it worked immediately. We began reversing desertification. We began increasing livestock, routinely doubling the number of animals on the land and getting immediate recovery beginning in the first year. And then after about 4 years, we began to get some erratic results. Back to the drawing board. Why are the results erratic? And looking at it, was it the planning process? No, it wasn't that. Where was it? And it was coming from social and cultural issues and economic issues that we hadn't brought into the whole complexity. And that's when the word holistic came in there. We had to go to holistic planned grazing. So the whole key to it is in that one word, holistic, where you deal with the entire complexity, social, cultural, economic, and environmental, where you decide whether you should even be running cattle or not, because many parts of the world, we shouldn't be running cattle at all. And if you are, well, I'm saying cattle, but sheep, goats, whatever, and if you are, then the holistic planned grazing kicks in, and that we have never, to my knowledge, had a failure. We've had thousands of people fail to do it and try to adopt the principle or think holistically, but no, we've got to actually make decisions holistically and plan, use the planning process. All right, so that we've had consistent results since 1984, and now that has spread to, we've lost count of the acreage, but it's certainly way over 50 million acres on 6 continents now, and not everybody doing it perfectly, some not so well, some better, some amazingly well, but all getting better, which is what matters. All right, here are some of the results. This is a fixed point photograph. Now, I know these sites very well because, as I say, I used to own this ranch, and then I owned a much bigger ranch 20 miles west of it, and I used to drive through this ranch on my way to home. And so for many, many years, this was bare no matter what rain. It didn't matter how much rain we got. It was always bare, right? And so you can see from the tree on the right now what it's like. That's within 1 year. Holistic plan grazing and getting things moving. Another site, you can see the tree marked in the middle and what it was like, and within the year how it's beginning to improve. This, I don't know if the color will show well, but it was amazing. I had to take a picture of it. This is about 40 years ago in the Karoo Desert, and for 8 miles it was green on the right and dry on the left. And there was no way we could make the rain fall for 8 miles along the road. We try hard to do that, but it was incredible. That's just the rainfall becoming more effective, even though that was still far from perfect. Now, this is the first ranch in the world where we doubled the livestock over the entire ranch. So usually we'd done it on parts of the ranch as we built. This was Dave Jack in the Karoo Desert, and I had to stop advising him because I was getting so involved in the army and politics in the war. And so a lot of people in other countries, I said, I'm just going to have to stop. And he pleaded with me to go on advising. And I said, well, Dave, I'll only do it if you put it in an airstrip. I cannot waste the time with you fetching me from a town. I need to land on your ranch, help you, and fly on. So he agreed to put it in an airstrip. And I saw it from about 12 miles away because it was this little square of grass showing up in the desert. I landed on it, and I was waiting for him to come and pick me up. And there's one perennial grass under the wing of the plane. The rest are annuals coming in. The rest of that ranch, I promise you, there was no grass. Perennial grass. We measured 6 kilometers from one annual grass to the next annual grass was 6 kilometers. And no perennials. There's the first perennial that they'd probably seen in 100 years. That because we broke the soil to make the airfield. And now, that same ranch, there it is. Okay. Now, this picture I put in the TED talk. I had to put the arrow there because the difference is so profound. You know, you can see. All right, so coming back to where we were, summarizing the climate change, which is the biggest threat to all of our cities, everything, I've tried to summarize it here. You've got on the left that we can stop or prevent about 50% of these using technology and finding alternative energy sources. The rest we can't. If we just overcome the public beliefs and resistance to livestock and the vilifying of livestock, now we make all of it possible. So you see now why I use the word only. And no scientist sticks their neck out that far and says only unless they're 1,000% sure. And no scientist has shown where I'm wrong in 50 years. By now they would have shown where it was wrong if there was some other answer than livestock properly used. Right, at least it gives us a chance if we can do that. Right, now, let me go on and conclude now. and then we can go to discussion time. I hope I've convinced you that there is hope ahead for California's drought, global desertification, but all of this hope rests on one thing, and that is changing the public perception of livestock. You know that livestock are vilified by many people. Now, vilifying livestock, that anger and indignation is 100% justified in the case of feedlots, feeding grain, putting livestock in factory settings. That's totally socially, health-wise, unsound, environmentally unsound, economically unsound. If we didn't have such ignorance, an ecological ignorance, that would be criminal. We would not be allowing that. It is just utter stupidity. All right, so that anger and indignation is okay. Now, there's some justification for the public anger and indignation at the way most people are running livestock today, on the private lands, the public lands, because of the state they're in. But where we go wrong is we blame the livestock. No, it's not the animals, it's the management. It's the management putting them in feedlots. It's the management on the land, allowing them to overrest the land, overgraze plants, cause the desertification that you're seeing all over Texas, New Mexico, Nevada, Colorado, you name it, the western states. So we need to draw this clear distinction between the management and the animals. We are vilifying the animals, and that is wrong. Now, if any of you are vegans, please be vegans. If you believe that it's good for your health, if you're convinced of that, be a vegan. If you want to be a vegan for religious reasons, be a vegan. But if you are persuading others who want to be a vegan for environmental reasons or ethical reasons, I'm afraid you're doing the wrong thing. You're doing damage to humanity, society, everything. So we need to start refining our thinking on some of these things and thinking about them a bit differently. All right, so it is our management and our policies at fault and not the animals, is what I want to stress. Now, recently, I hope you'll all look at it if you haven't seen it already. There was a National Geographic PBS release that came out that started on our land in Zimbabwe and then went to Siberia, East Africa, etc. Now, that was tremendous because institutions are beginning to change as public perception changes following the TED Talk that was so helpful. And Dr. Sanjan, who was the host there, he was a senior scientist with the Nature Conservancy, and it was wonderful to watch the change. In that movie, he's really sincere and genuine. He comes over so well with just the shock, and he makes some amazing statements, such as this is the most exciting thing that's ever come out in conservation, etc. And then another place he makes a statement about all his life, what he believed, he suddenly finds is wrong. So it's wonderful when people can be open like that and recognize that, and it's a great endorsement. Now, what I'm telling you tonight is not new. I've been saying this for nearly 50 years, while things have been getting a lot worse worldwide. Now, many years ago, I bumped into a prominent wildlifer, a very respected wildlifer, Jim Teer, Dr. Jim Teer in Texas. Jim's unfortunately dead now. I never got the opportunity to work with him. I worked with some other American wildlifers who were tremendous mentors to me in the early days, but I didn't work with Jim. But we did meet in Texas, and he made a strange statement, and this is 35 years ago. He said, "Allan, either you're wrong, and we're not going to be able to dig a damned hole deep enough to put you in." He said, "Or you're right, and we won't be able to build a monument high enough." And I said, "Jim, I don't give a damn what you do, I'll be dead." And I said, "But what do you think?" And he said, "I'm sitting on the fence." Okay, so for 35, 40 years, nearly 50 years, there's been too many people sitting on the fence. There isn't actually a fence. You either are going to go on believing in ancient beliefs that livestock cause deserts, or we're going to start heeding science and we need to start making up our minds and thinking about these much more clearly. Now, if we're to have any hope, all right, it has to follow institutional change, because we can get all the farmers and ranchers on the land changing their practices, and they'll all be more profitable, stable, etc., as we know from the results. But we need to get institutional change, because we've also got to change policies, which are unsound today. Now, the only hope we have of changing policies is to change the public perception first, because this is a counterintuitive new scientific insight. Now, if you study the social sciences and history, you'll find that institutions, organizations, even if they want to, cannot accept new scientific insights ahead of public opinion. I cannot find a single instance in history. So institutions, organizations, will always tend to lead in the prevailing paradigm. We all believe in technology, so go into any cattleman's organization, university, whatever, and you'll see the latest software, the latest computers, etc. But if it's counterintuitive, they lead the ridicule and opposition, and have done throughout history. So nobody's being bad. It's just how complex systems work. So knowing that, what we need to do is, and I will be preaching to many people about this and keep doing it, is stop blaming people. Nobody is deliberately doing the wrong thing. They aren't bad. Most people are trying to do the right thing. But in institutions, they cannot change until a certain level of public opinion changes. That's why 20 minutes on TED Talk going to nearly 3 million people did more than 50 years of trying to get the information out to the public. But today, with the internet, social networking, etc., we can get the information out to the public. And most people look at this and say, that's common sense. It makes sense. That's a common reaction. All right, so we need change if we're to save our cities, save everything you hold dear, but we need leadership. Now, if you wait for leadership, which means a new direction, and knowledge like this is counterintuitive, you will wait forever, and politicians cannot lead, universities cannot lead, cattlemen's organizations cannot lead. None of these organizations can lead. So where does the leadership come from? And the answer, it comes from your freelance writers, your photographers, these people who get the information out to the public, etc., and it comes from you, the ordinary people. You are the leaders by talking to your neighbors, the other people, spreading the word. And when you get a significant shift, boom, institutions can change. So we've got to facilitate the change in institutions, not by criticizing, not by blaming, and all the things we do, and expecting them to change, when not a single cattleman's organization in America has yet supported this. So you see, it's not just those bureaucrats out there. It's us, people, just being human and how we behave in organizations. So the future, I'm afraid, is up to you, the people on either side of you, and good luck in the future. Thank you.